My son called me on a Thursday evening in February, 11 days before his daughter's baptism, the one I was paying $22,000 for, and told me I'd be sitting with the extended family at the reception. Not at the head table, not beside him, with the extended family. I asked him once, quietly, what that meant. He said his mother-in-law felt the seating should reflect the hosting side. I said, I see, I'll think about it. And then I hung up, and I looked at the folder on my kitchen counter. The blue one, the one with my name on every single contract inside it. I thought about it for exactly 4 minutes. Then I called my accountant. My name is Judith Holt. I'm 67 years old, and I've been a licensed electrician since I was 24. I started as an apprentice in a union hall in Hamilton, Ontario, the only woman in a cohort of 19. My supervisor told me in my first week that women didn't last in the trades. I lasted 43 years. I built Holt Electrical from a one-woman operation with a second-hand van and a box of tools I'd bought on credit into a company with 31 employees and contracts with school boards, municipal buildings, and 3 hospital renovation projects across southern Ontario. I retired 2 years ago and handed the operations to my project manager, but my name is still on the door and the money is still in my account. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest, because what I'm about to say is going to make you angry at my son, and I need you to understand the full picture before you get there. My son's name is Patrick. He's 38 years old, and I raised him alone from the time he was 6, after his father decided that a wife who worked nights and weekends and smelled like electrical conduit was not the life he'd signed up for. Patrick grew up watching me wire things. He did homework at job sites. He learned to read blueprints before he learned to drive. He became a civil engineer, which I was proud of, and he married Amber 3 years ago, which I was also proud of, right up until I wasn't. Amber is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly because nothing that follows should be read as a verdict on her character. She's 34, ambitious, sharp, and she comes from a family that has money the way some families have weather. It's just always been there, and they've forgotten it has anything to do with luck. Her parents, Gerald and Renee Marchetti, own a chain of import furniture stores across the GTA. They live in Oakville in a house with a circular driveway and a kitchen that was featured in a magazine once. They are the kind of people who say, of course, to things that cost $10,000 and wince slightly at things that cost $12,000. I met them at the engagement dinner at a restaurant in Mississauga that Amber chose, and that cost $420 for 5 people before tip. Renee looked at my hands. I've always had electrician's hands, scarred at the knuckles, the skin permanently roughened from 40 years of pulling wire through conduit, and she smiled the way you smile at a pleasant curiosity. Patrick tells us you were in the trades, she said. An electrician, was it? How wonderful that you found your niche. I told her I'd built a company. She nodded with the generous enthusiasm of someone who has never had to build anything. Isn't that something? She said, and turned to ask Amber about the venue deposit. That was the whole relationship in 90 seconds. I just didn't know it yet. When Amber became pregnant, I offered to host the baptism. I want to be precise about what that meant. I offered to pay for the event, the hall rental, the catering, the flowers, the cake, the photographer, because Patrick and Amber were carrying a mortgage on a house in Burlington that stretched them in ways young people's mortgages do, and because my granddaughter's baptism mattered to me, and because I had the money and I wanted to give it. Every cent of it from 31 people whose payroll I'd signed for 2 decades. I did not write a check to Patrick and Amber. I want you to understand this, because it's the part that changes everything later. I am a contractor. I have been a contractor my entire adult life. I know what happens when you give someone money and trust them to be responsible with it. So I did what I do. I became the client. I called the hall myself, the Lakeview Banquet Hall in Burlington, and I negotiated the contract and I signed it. Judith Holt, responsible party. I did the same with the catering company, the florist, the photographer. I read every cancellation clause, every refund term, every notice period. My accountant, a woman named Sandra who has kept my books for 15 years, read them with me. She pointed out that I was the sole signatory on every contract, and that cancellations made before the 45-day mark would recover most deposits. "Why would I cancel?" I said. "It's my granddaughter's baptism." "No reason," Sandra said. "Just good to know the exits." I filed everything in a blue folder and I put it in the drawer beside my kitchen counter where I keep important things, and I forgot about what Sandra said for 3 months. The Marchettis moved in the way Renee's kind always do. Not with force, but with the kind of gentle authority that comes from assuming the world naturally bends their way. It started with the hall. Renee had a few thoughts about the layout. Then about the menu. The catering company I'd chosen was lovely, but perhaps something a little more appropriate to the occasion, because the Marchettis had a relationship with a different company that did Italian family style. I said, of course, as long as we stayed in budget. Renee said she was sure it would be fine. I later found out she'd called the catering company directly and changed 3 menu items without telling me. When I found out, I mentioned it to Patrick. He said it was probably a miscommunication. "She was just trying to help, Mum. There were 100 small things." There always are with this kind of person. The flowers. Renee preferred a different palette. The baptism cake. Amber's aunt made cakes, and it would mean a lot to have something personal, so my deposit with the bakery was quietly absorbed into a favor for the family. The photographer. Gerald knew someone, a proper professional, and the implication was that my choice might not be. I let most of it go because I kept telling myself the same thing. It's not about you, Judith. It's about the baby. That's the trap, I understand now. That's exactly the trap. When you love someone, you let them use your decency as a door they walk through. Every time I said it's not about me, I handed them another key. My friend Colette. She's been my closest friend since our apprenticeship days. She runs a plumbing company in Stony Creek. Colette told me in November, when I described the situation over coffee in her kitchen, that I was paying for a party I'd been uninvited from. "You're the bankroll, Jude," she said. "They're treating you like a bankroll." I said it was more complicated than that. Colette said, "It never is." She refilled my cup and put the pot down hard. "You wired your first job site when you were 24 years old, and every man there assumed you'd quit by Christmas. You didn't quit then, and you're not going to let a furniture store family make you invisible at your own granddaughter's baptism." I drove home that night knowing she was right and still telling myself I was overreacting. Then the seating chart arrived. Amber texted it to me on a Wednesday night. I don't think it was an accident. I think these things are never entirely accidents, but I also don't think she was fully aware of what she was sending. The chart showed the head table. Amber and Patrick, the Marchettis, Amber's sister and her husband, Amber's grandmother, my granddaughter's head table, the table where the hosting family sat. And I was not at it. I was at table 4. With Patrick's aunt from Sudbury and 2 cousins I'd met once at the wedding, and a colleague of Gerald's I'd never met at all. Table 4 at an event I was paying $22,000 for. I called Patrick the next morning. I was calm. I am always calm. You learn that in the trades, where losing your temper on a job site gets someone hurt. "Patrick," I said, "I saw the seating chart. I think there might be an error. I wasn't on the head table." There was a pause long enough to tell me everything. "Oh," he said. "Right. So, the thing is, Renee has a lot of family coming, and the head table is pretty set for the immediate family on both sides." I said I was the immediate family. He said, "I know, Mum. But Renee feels strongly that it's the Marchetti side that's kind of hosting. And then he said it. The thing that I think had been rehearsed, because it didn't sound like my son. You can still be involved in everything, Mum. You'll just enjoy it more if you're not worried about the formality of the head table." Renee says the parent's role at these things is really just to support from the background. Support from the background. While paying $22,000, I said, "I see, Patrick. Let me think about it." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table with my electrician's hands flat on the wood, and I thought about 42 years of mornings I'd started before anyone else was awake. I thought about the years I'd packed Patrick's school lunch at 5:30 in the morning because I had a 6 a.m. call. I thought about the Christmas he was 11, and I'd worked a double on Christmas Eve because the hospital furnace had failed and the auxiliary power needed rewiring, and someone had to go, and I was the one they called because I was the best one. I thought about every school play and hockey game I'd attended in my work clothes because there was no time to go home and change. And I thought about a seating chart that put the woman who funded the entire occasion at table 4 with strangers. Colette called me that night, not because I'd told her anything, just because she has a radar for these things. "How are you?" she said. "I'm deciding something," I said. "Have you decided it yet?" "Almost." "Good," she said, "because your granddaughter is watching what a woman with self-respect looks like. Even if she's only 3 weeks old, she'll know it eventually." I did not sleep well. I gave them one more chance because I always give one more chance, and it is always my most expensive habit. The chance came and went 2 days later when Patrick texted me, not called, texted, to say that he and Amber had discussed it, and they really needed me to drop the table issue because it was creating tension with Renee. And also could I confirm that the final payment to the hall was on track as the venue had sent a reminder, and Amber wanted to make sure it was handled. Could I confirm that the payment was on track? Could I confirm that the person not welcome at the head table, would be making the $22,000 payment on schedule? I put the phone down on the counter. I walked to the drawer beside the kitchen counter. I took out the blue folder. I opened it. I read the cancellation clause on the Lakeview Banquet Hall contract. Notice given more than 45 days prior to the event date, 85% refund of all deposits, with the venue's right to rebook the date. The baptism was 53 days away. I sat down at the table with the folder open in front of me, and I did what I've done at every critical decision in 40 years of business. I counted what I knew. I knew I was the sole signatory. I knew the cancellation window was still open. I knew that not one of the Marchettas had signed a single piece of paper connected to this event because I had read every contract and their name was on none of them. I knew that my accountant answered her phone. I texted Patrick back. I said, "I'll be in touch about the payments shortly." Then I called Sandra. Sandra picked up on the second ring because Sandra always picks up. I told her about table 4. I told her about support from the background. I told her about the text asking me to confirm the payment while excluding me from the event I was funding. Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Judith," she said, in the voice she uses when she's moved from friend to professional. "What do you want to do?" "I want to invoke every cancellation clause I have," I said, "and I want every dollar that's coming back to me returned within the terms of the contracts. And I want the notices sent today, so there's a timestamp before Patrick has a chance to call me back and talk me out of it." Sandra said, "You understand what this means?" I said I understood it meant there was no baptism reception. "Not at Lakeview, not with these vendors, not on this date." "That's correct," Sandra said. "Once I send the formal notices, send them," I said. Sandra exhaled slowly. "All right." She paused. "They're going to be devastated. My son and my daughter-in-law are going to be ups either way," I said. "They can be upset having learned that generosity has conditions, or they can stay comfortable having learned it doesn't. One of those lessons is worth something." Sandra said, "I'll send the cancellation notices within the hour." She did. Patrick called me 40 minutes later. I let it ring 3 times, not to be cruel, but because I needed to be steady. "Mom," his voice was already tight, already halfway to panic. "Mom," the hall called. "And the caterer." "What did you?" "Mom, the baptism is in 7 weeks, 53 days," I said, "which is why the cancellation terms apply and why I'll recover most of the deposits." "Why would you do this?" His voice cracked. And there it was, the same question that people always ask when they mean, "Why are you protecting yourself instead of absorbing what we've done to you?" "Patrick," I said, "I didn't do this to you. I chose not to do something to myself." I told him what I'd been carrying for 3 months. The catering changes made without my knowledge. The photographer replaced by Gerald's contact without anyone asking me. The flowers, the cake, the 100 small erasures. And now table 4, while my name sat at the bottom of $22,000 in vendor contracts. I told him all of it. calmly, the way I would brief a client on a project scope that had gone sideways. He was quiet for a long time. Renee thought. He started. "Patrick," I said gently, "I'm not interested in what Renee thought. I'm interested in what you thought. You sent me that text. You asked me to confirm the payment. Did it not occur to you, when you typed those words, what you were asking?" Silence. The quality of it told me something had shifted. Not enough, not yet, but the first crack. "She's going to be furious," he said, meaning Renee. "I imagine so," I said. "And you know what, Patrick, that's between the two of you. I'm not afraid of Renee Marchetti. I've dealt with general contractors and building inspectors and union reps and municipal planning departments for 40 years. A furniture store owner in Oakville with a circular driveway is not the most difficult person I've ever had to disappoint." He made a sound that was almost a laugh and then caught himself. "What do I tell Amber?" "Tell her the truth," I said. "Tell her that the contracts were all in my name because I paid for everything, and that I've exercised the cancellation rights that were always mine to exercise. Tell her that if the Marchettis want to host a baptism reception, they are welcome to book a venue and sign the contracts themselves." "They can't," he started and stopped. I waited. "They don't have $22,000, Mom," he said quietly. "Dad's business. They've had a difficult couple of years. The Oakville house, the mortgage on it is, they've been. Renee's been counting on." He stopped. "On me," I finished. "The electrician from Hamilton they were willing to put at table 4. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Renee called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail lasted 4 minutes and went through 3 distinct phases: concerned, entitled, and then something that I can only describe as the social fury of a woman who has realized the scaffolding was never hers. She referred to my behavior as reactive. She said that any reasonable woman would understand the complexity of blended family dynamics at these occasions. She said that the Marchetti name carried certain expectations in the Burlington-Oakville corridor, and that my actions had put everyone in a very difficult position. She closed by saying she expected we could resolve this like adults, and that I would of course want to do right by my grandchild. Do right by my grandchild. As though canceling an event I was funding, from which I'd been subtly and systematically excluded, was somehow against my granddaughter's interests. I called Renee back that afternoon from my car in the parking lot of Arona in Ancaster, where I'd stopped to pick up wire connectors for a small project I was doing at home. I want you to picture that. Renee in her Oakville sitting room with the stone fireplace. Me in a 15-year-old pickup truck in a hardware store parking lot in my work vest. Every cent I own earned on the end of a wire stripper. I said, "Renee, I got your message." She started immediately. So glad I'd called. She was sure we could sort this out today. Perhaps we'd misunderstood each other. It was all really just about logistics. "No," I said. She paused. "I beg your pardon." "No," I said again. "I'm not going to sort it out. The cancellations stand." The silence on the other end was the particular silence of a person who has spent 60 years in a world that says yes to them. "Judith," she said, with the careful precision of someone managing their voice, "I think you need to understand that this is deeply upsetting for Amber and deeply unfair to the child." "Renee," I said, "I'm going to stop you there. My granddaughter is 3 weeks old, and she has no opinion about reception venues. What's unfair to the child is a grandmother who is treated as a payment source and a stranger. My name was on table 4. My name was on every contract. Those two facts cannot coexist comfortably, and you chose which one mattered to you." I heard her breath change. "We gave Amber everything," she said. "Opportunities, connections, a life of. You gave Amber a great deal," I said, "and I gave Patrick a great deal. The difference is that I don't expect a good seat in exchange for it." She didn't have an answer for that. "The contracts are canceled," I said. "The deposits will be refunded to me per the terms I negotiated. If you'd like to rebook a reception for a later date, you're welcome to do so. I'll attend whatever you organize. But I will not fund an event and sit at table 4 while doing it. I hope that's clear." I said goodbye and I drove home. What happened in the next 2 weeks was the most clarifying period of my son's adult life, and I know that because he told me so later. Without my $22,000, the Marchettis had to do what my cancellation had made unavoidable. They had to be honest, at least among themselves, about what they had. Gerald's import business had contracted badly over the past 3 years. 2 of the store locations had closed. The Oakville house carried a mortgage they'd refinanced twice. The circular driveway and the magazine kitchen were the remaining props of a performance the audience had started to notice was underfunded. They could not replace what I'd provided. They had nowhere close to $22,000 available for an event that was now less than 8 weeks out. Amber saw all of it. She watched her mother try to find a solution and fail. She watched her father make phone calls that didn't go anywhere. And then, on a Saturday afternoon when Patrick was at the hardware store, not my hardware store, a different hardware store, it's a coincidence. Amber called me herself. No Patrick, no Renee, no choreography. Just my daughter-in-law's voice, quiet and a little ragged. "Can I come over?" she said. "Of course," I said. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Patrick had done homework in the years when I'd come home at midnight and check it before he woke up in the morning, and she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "My mother changed your catering order." "I know," I said. "She didn't ask you." "No," I said. "And the photographer." And she told Patrick the head table was a Marchetti family tradition and that it would be rude to change it. I nodded. "And you said nothing for 3 months. I was hoping it would resolve itself," I said. She shook her head. "You were being kind." "I was being a mother," I said. "It's sometimes the same thing, and sometimes a mistake." She looked at my hands. Electrician's hands, knuckled and marked. Her mother had looked at them the same way at the engagement dinner and found them wanting. Amber looked at them like she was seeing them properly for the first time. "I told Patrick he had to choose," she said, "between defending you and keeping the peace with my mother." I said I hadn't asked him to choose. "I know," she said. "I did. Because I watched him not defend you for 3 months, and I realized he was doing what I was doing. Following my mother's lead. And I don't." Her voice broke and came back. "I don't want my daughter to grow up watching her father sit quietly while someone treats his mother like a check." She looked up. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I sent you to table 4. I reached across and I put one of my scarred hands over hers. "You didn't send me anywhere," I said. "You sent me the chart without thinking. The placing was someone else's design." She nodded. "Will you come back?" she asked. "To the baptism, whatever we figure out. Will you come?" I said I had never not been coming to my granddaughter's baptism. The reception was another matter. But I would be in that church, in the front row, where the grandmothers belong, wearing my good coat, and no one was going to rearrange that. The confrontation with Renee happened the following week, and I had not asked for it, but I had also not taken steps to prevent it, because I am 67 years old, and I have run out of patience for unfinished business. She arrived at my house with Gerald, and Patrick and Amber were already there, and I let them all in, and I made tea because I am from Hamilton, and we make tea. Renee sat down at my table with the careful posture of a woman who intends to run a meeting. "Judith," she said, "I think it's time we cleared the air." I said I thought that was a fine idea. She said she understood that I felt I'd been sidelined, and that was never the intention. The seating arrangement was simply about managing the table size and the Renee. I said, "I'm going to show you something." I got up and I went to the counter and I got the blue folder. I came back to the table and I opened it, and I laid the contracts out, one at a time, the way you lay out wire schematics when you want someone to understand a system before you explain what went wrong with it. "The hall, the catering, the florist, the photographer," I said. "Read the signature line on any of them." She leaned forward. "Judith Holt, Judith Holt." "Not Marchetti," I said. "Not Patrick. Not Amber. Mine. Because I am a contractor, and I do not hand large sums of money to people and trust good manners to protect me. I learned that in my 20s on job sites, where people assumed good manners would protect them and found out otherwise. I stacked the contracts and I closed the folder. "You spent 4 months treating me as a funding source. You changed my vendor arrangements without my knowledge. You put me at table 4 at an event I was paying for, and not once Did anyone in this room ask me what I wanted? I looked at Gerald. He was studying the tablecloth. Gerald, I said, do you want to tell Amber and Patrick what the current situation is with the Marchetti accounts? Or shall I leave you to it? Gerald looked up. He was not an unkind man, I don't think. Just a man who had long ago let his wife run things and had gotten comfortable not knowing what running things cost. He said quietly, "We can't cover it. Not the full amount. Not even close." The room was very still. Amber looked at her parents. I watched my son look at his wife, and I watched, on Amber's face, the particular expression of a person who has just understood something they'd been carefully not understanding. Her mother had not been managing a social occasion. She had been managing a gap. She had been using my money and my exclusion at the same time, which is a thing you can only do for so long before someone reads the contracts. Renee said, in a voice stretched thin over a great deal of feeling, "We were trying to give our daughter a beautiful occasion." "So was I said. I closed the folder. "The difference is that the occasion I was giving was also mine. You wanted the contribution without the contributor. And I've been in business too long to offer that arrangement." "You could have said something," Renee said, and her voice cracked a little on the last word. I looked at her steadily. "I have said many things, Renee," I said. "I said I was the mother of the groom and I expected to be involved. I said the catering changes hadn't been discussed with me. I raised the seating question with Patrick and was told to drop it. I am not a woman who doesn't say things. I'm a woman who was not listened to. Those are not the same." Renee didn't have an answer, and from across the table, Amber said, "She's right." Renee turned. "Amber?" "She's right," Amber said, and there was something finished about it, something that told me she'd made up her mind before she'd walked in the door. "We arranged her money, and then arranged her away from the table. And she's the one who wired the hall, metaphorically speaking. She built the thing, and we told her where she could sit. And Mom," her voice was very steady now, "I've watched Patrick not push back all autumn, and I've watched myself not push back, and I don't want my daughter to see that. I want her to see what this woman—" She nodded at me, looks like when she's pushed. Because she didn't yell. She read her contracts, and she made her calls, and she was calm the whole time. That's what I want my daughter to learn. Patrick reached across and took my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He is his mother's son, and sometimes that just takes a while to arrive. Gerald drove Renee home. She was not raging. She was too tired for rage by then, I think, or too honest with herself about the month they'd had without my funds. Before she left, she paused in my doorway and she looked at me, and for a second, something crossed her face that wasn't hostility or embarrassment, but something older and more complicated. The look of a woman who has spent a very long time being impressive and has just, in a modest kitchen in Hamilton, met someone she could not outrank. She said, "You're quite something, Judith," I said. "So I've been told. Usually by people who meant it as a warning." She left. Here's what happened after, because I believe in clean accounts. The $22,000 came back. Sandra negotiated the refund terms, and every vendor returned the deposits within the periods specified in the contracts, minus 2 small administrative fees that Sandra waived as goodwill. Judith Holt, responsible party, had her money home by the end of the month. There was no grand reception. Not at Lakeview, not organized by the Marchettis, not on the original date. What there was instead was a baptism lunch at my house, my actual house. My kitchen and my back dining room with the table extended for 21 people, catered by a woman from my neighborhood who makes Ukrainian food and charges $400 for a spread that would make you want to cry with gratitude. I made the baptism cake myself, which I have done for every significant occasion in my family going back to Patrick's first birthday. Because I am a practical woman, and I make good cake and no one has ever complained. My granddaughter wore a gown that had been my mother's and my mother's mother's before that, and I had it cleaned and pressed by a woman in the Hammer I've known for 20 years. Renee sat at my table and ate the food I'd organized, and she was gracious about it, which I'll give her, because grace under difficulty is something you can respect even in people who've disappointed you. Patrick and I are closer now than we've been since he left for university. That's the thing about a collision with the truth. If you come out the other side, you come out lighter. He knows now what I'm made of, which he'd always known abstractly, the way children know things. But now he knows it in his cells, the way adults know things that have been demonstrated. He told me in December, standing in my kitchen while I was making shortbread, that watching me cancel those contracts and stay calm through the whole thing and never yell and never beg was the first time in his adult life he'd understood what it actually meant that his mother had built a company. I always knew it, he said. I just didn't know what it meant. I said, hand him a piece of shortbread because I am his mother and that's what you do. The $22,000 is not gone, and I didn't keep it to spite anyone. I put $15,000 of it into an education savings account for my granddaughter. The remaining $7,000 I spent on a proper family trip, me, Patrick, Amber, and the baby, to Cape Breton in July, renting a house on the Cabot Trail for a week. We drove the whole trail in 2 days and ate lobster rolls, and the baby slept in a carrier on Amber's chest in the sea wind, and I took about 400 photographs. The money I would have spent on a reception in a rented hall, on chairs and centerpieces, and a meal served to people arranging me toward the back of the room. I spent instead on 8 months of my granddaughter's future, and a week on the most beautiful island I've ever seen. Amber told me in August, sitting on the deck of that rented house watching Patrick carry the baby along the waterline, that she'd been embarrassed early in the marriage, that her husband's mother was a tradesperson. Not ashamed, she said carefully, but aware. The way you're aware that something doesn't fit the image you'd been assembling of your adult life. I told her I understood. I grew up aware of what my family didn't have. The wanting to be more is the most human thing there is. She said, I don't feel that anymore. I said I was glad. She said, I feel like I'm married into the family that actually knows how things work. I said that was probably the nicest thing anyone had ever said to me, and I meant it. I ran into Renee at a community fundraiser in November. She was there with Gerald, and she saw me across the room, and there was a brief, visible calculation. The kind you watch people do when they're deciding whether the social cost of acknowledgement is higher or lower than the social cost of avoidance. She chose acknowledgement. She walked over. She said it was good to see me, and asked about Patrick and the baby. I told her they were well. I asked about the stores. She said they were restructuring, which is the word people use when things are difficult but manageable. I said I hoped it sorted itself out. I meant it. I don't carry grudges. Grudges are weight. I gave up carrying somewhere around year 15 of running a business because there isn't room in the toolbox. She looked at my hands, then, the electrician's hands she'd cataloged at the engagement dinner. Then she looked up. You really did read every contract, she said. I said I always do. Must be nice, she said, knowing how to do that. I told her it wasn't a secret. I told her the only way to know how a contract works is to read it, and the only way to read it is to understand that it matters. And the only way to understand that it matters is to have learned, usually the hard way, that the words you agree to are the words you live by. She nodded. Then she said, I'm sorry about the seating. Just that. Just those words, simply. I told her I appreciated that. We said goodbye and she went back to Gerald and I went back to my conversation, and that was the last difficult thing between us. If there's something I'd leave you with from all of this, it's this. Your money is not a donation. When you give to the people you love, and you should give as much as you can. Give until it feels like the best version of yourself. You are not required to give your face and your dignity along with the check. The day someone wants what you offer but not who you are, the day your generosity becomes a resource to be managed and your presence a logistical problem to be arranged away from the good table, that's the day to open the folder. Read the contracts you signed. Know where the exits are, not because you plan to use them, but because a woman who knows where the door is stands differently in a room than a woman who doesn't. I knew where the door was. I'd made sure of it quietly before anyone decided they needed to push me through it. That's not coldness. That's 43 years of showing up. It's what these hands built, and I'm not in the habit of giving it away to anyone who treats the giver as a line item. Not even for family. Not even for love. Especially not for love. Because the people who love you back, and there are always people who love you back, they're the ones who come and sit at your kitchen table and eat your food and ask you to come back and mean it when they say you belong in the front. That's where I've been all along. Right here, in my own kitchen, where the table is always extended and the chair at the head of it has always had my name on it. I just stopped letting anyone else arrange the seating.